as possible. ISO 20022 is called and recognized as the standard of the future. And I remember I briefly touched this topic at Hong Kong Blockchain Week. Can you please tell us more about how this standard is applied?
Sure. So ISO 20022 is a standard that's been in development for more than 10 years. And it's not just a messaging standard. That's kind of a misinterpretation of what it is. At its very base, it's actually business flows. So for example, when you're doing a payment, what does that look like? Who are the parties involved? What information do they send to each other, et cetera, et cetera. When you break that down to its components, you end up actually with a very rich kind of data dictionary, which allows you to reuse these components in different ways, like a recipe book. So ISO 20022 absolutely is pervasive in our industry. It's used across payments, securities, transactions. And the reason that it's done so well as a standard is really because of its flexibility and also the fact that it's an open source standard. So anybody can go to ISO20022.org and get the information on the standard out of that. But why it's important from, maybe I'll talk first from a payments perspective and then from a securities perspective, but why it's important from a payments perspective is it allows innovation to grow. So it provides a base about how people interact, so a language, and then on top of it, it allows innovation to grow from there. So I'll give you an example of that. For example, in Australia, there's a real-time payment platform called SmQke. That Australian platform actually does person-to-person payment transactions within, let's say, less than 10 seconds. It does this transaction. And that's all based on ISO 20022. The idea is to then, on top of that, build a layer that allows fintech companies to plug into that fast payment utility. And that will allow those fintech companies to be able to offer services to the market. For example, let's say you want to get a mortgage and you have to do all of the document checks, you have to do et cetera, and then that results at the end of the day into a payment of your deposit. That could be a fintech company sitting on top of that does document checking and eventually helps to initiate the payment. And what that allows you to do is, because we've agreed on the business standards and how you, for example, initiate payment, it's then more interesting and easy for fintech companies to be able to grow on top of that, because they no longer need to worry about how do they communicate with that real-time payments platform, how do they communicate with the banks. That basis is set and it allows innovation to grow. Another example of that is we do a lot of work with the World Wide Web Consortium around payments and how payments go from a web browser. So we worked very closely with this group over the years, which includes the like of Google, Apple, et cetera, who are all looking at a common standard on how to do payments